If you want to have fresh vegetables all winter long without a greenhouse, you need to start planting now. When we first started growing our vegetables over 20 years ago, I just did an annual summer vegetable garden. So we just planted all of the crops in usually about mid to end of May, and we had all of them throughout the summer months, and that was it. So the only food that we were eating that was from our garden during the fall and winter months were the things that I had preserved. But I then discovered the beauty of doing a fall garden. But the first couple of years that I started doing a fall gardening, I really didn't know, without having a greenhouse or some type of heated environment, how well those crops would actually do in our cold northern winters. And I actually had quite a few flops and failures the first couple of years. So you need to make sure that you're planting those cool weather crops that will be hardy down to 28 degrees Fahrenheit, so when you get some of those frosts coming through, it doesn't kill them. So some of the great examples of those crops are going to be your onions, your garlic, your lettuce. So specifically that cool weather lettuce is one that works really well. Anything in the brassica family. So I've got broccoli, we've got cauliflower, and the same thing even with your snow peas. These will continue to grow in that cooler weather. Spinach, which is common in the summer vegetable garden, your spinach will bolt and go to seed. Great thing about growing this as a fall crop is you don't have to deal with that. And then we've got even more things that we can plant. For example, you can do your carrots, so you've got your root crops. So we've got carrots, you can do beets, cabbage of course, your kale, Brussels sprouts, all different radishes, and even your potatoes. You can actually do a fall planting of potatoes. But the key to growing all these successfully is you have to make sure that you're planting them at the right time for your climate. So one of the first mistakes that I made when I was doing the fall garden planting is I was thinking, well, I'm going to be harvesting during the fall and the winter, and so I didn't start them until the beginning of fall. Well, you have to start them so many weeks before your first average frost dates, because if you start them too late, once those cool weather temps hit and you begin to get those frosts, it doesn't kill these cool weather vegetables, but it puts them basically into hibernation mode. So they're not going to really grow very much more and develop a lot more once you start to hit those temps. So on one hand, it's great because however far along it is and established, it's going to stay there. So it prolongs it, like puts it like kind of like into the refrigeration, except it's still a live plant. But the issue is, I didn't plant my carrots soon enough. The first year I did carrots as a fall crop. I planted them about mid to end of August, and my first frost date is usually about the end of September, beginning of October. So that was only with about 4 weeks growing time. And so when those first frost hits, it didn't kill the carrots, but they were just this little tiny spindly root. I mean, they weren't even baby carrot size, and they never developed throughout the rest of the winter. Now they wintered over, and then the next year, they went ahead and blossomed, and that's how I get all of my carrot seeds. So it was great for seed saving, but it wasn't great for actually eating during the fall months. So it's key, you have to know your first average frost date and then count backwards for however many weeks each of those crops require. Now don't worry if you're like, well, I have no idea how many weeks before my first frost date to start all of these different crops because they change by crop. Make sure you stay through with me until the end of the video. Now, one of the other problems is we're trying to start these cool weather plants that don't like to germinate and grow in really hot conditions, but in order to have them be of appropriate size once the cold weather comes, we have to start them basically the hottest time of the year. For most areas of the country, that's going to be July through August. So there's a couple of options that I found that work really well. One of those is to use your existing trellises or areas of shade in the garden so that you're keeping that soil cool and the conditions right so that they can germinate and grow. So this is our bean trellis, and these will continue to come up. We're in mid-July right now. So these are going to continue to grow up and they'll provide even more shade. And you can see, I even use this when I'm doing, these are some of my spring crops. So this is the broccoli that you can tell some of it's bolting, going to seed, it's getting ready to be pulled. But I still have a little bit that I'm harvesting off of these side shoots here. So extra tip, when you harvest your broccoli, the main head, as long as it hasn't bolted, go ahead and leave it because you'll get lots of small little florets And you can continue to harvest it off of it for at least a few more weeks as long as it doesn't bolt, which is one of the things that we deal with these cool weather crops in the heat of summer. So this will help provide shade when you are putting in either your new seeds or your little baby seedlings of those brassicas, even though we're at the hottest time of the year. Now, you might not have a trellis system, so you're like, well, this isn't gonna work for me, I don't have that. But you can use lots of different things that you may have in the garden. So I've got over here my snow peas, and you will wanna keep in mind, so that's my southern exposure, northern exposure. So my sun is always in this direction. So I can plant some of my cool weather crops, which I've done a little bit here with this lettuce, even though this lettuce has been in for quite a while and is going to bolt. So that anything that I plant on this backside will get some shade provided by these taller structures. So you can kind of look through your garden, and anywhere that you have anything that's vertical, by planting on that backside, you'll be providing a little bit of a microclimate that will help to keep the temperatures cool for those fall crops. So we just pulled out the broccoli that was done from the spring planting, and now in its place, practicing good crop rotation, you actually would want to follow it with a fruiting crop or a root crop. So we're going to put our carrots in here, and these are carrot seeds. They look a little bit different when you seed save them yourself because they still have like the little fuzzy parts on the side. They almost look like a little bit of a bug, to tell you the truth. But if you want to learn how to seed save your carrot seed, you can check out that video where I show you how to seed save carrots. So we're going to get these in the ground. And when I'm planting carrot seed, I just am pretty liberal. So I just put them right on the surface of the dirt here. And then carrot seeds sometimes have an issue with germination. Usually they have a trouble germinating when you've let the soil dry out. So that's one of the advantages here, that we're planting underneath the bean trellis, because this is going to help. It'll be in somewhat of the shade, so it won't dry out as fast during these hot months. And then I just put them on the surface. I don't even put them down in the dirt or cover them up. And by doing that, I've had really great success with having almost all of my carrot seeds germinate. Really the key factor though is making sure, like I said, that you keep them wet until they've germinated. And then I just go through, I find it easier just to go through and thin the carrots out rather than worry about getting one carrot in a nice little even row. So I just kind of go like this, and then I'll make sure and get some water on them. All right, and fall carrot crop is planted. One of your other options, if you don't have a lot of large trellises or vertical things in your garden to create shade, or if you just don't have enough for all the crops that you want to plant, is to do seed starting. Now, when you're doing this seed starting, typically we think of doing this in the winter months and you need to have a grow light, but you don't have to have a grow light when you're seed starting your fall crops. You can do this indoors if you live in a really hot environment, but you can also just do it outside. So it's also easier to keep the soil really moist when we're seed starting in a small environment like this rather than that whole big garden bed. So I just got some of my regular garden soil here. Now typically for seed starting when I'm doing this indoors, I use potting soil, but I'm only going to have them in here for a short period of time, and it's for temperature control, not where I'm planning on growing these a lot. So I have got my broccoli as well as some cauliflower here that I'm going to be seed starting here because I'm out of space. I'm going to be doing more of my root crops and some other things in those trellised areas, and I'm going to be putting this broccoli in areas that I don't have shade. And whenever I'm doing seed starting, I tend to just sow way more than I think I'm going to need because you can always thin it out. And like I said, I don't want to miss that window of these actually getting started. And so it's more important to me to use more seeds and have a lot more broccoli starts than I think I'm going to need than vice versa. Because if I have to replant these, I run the risk of them not being large enough by the time the cold weather hits. So I just kind of sow these all over. I don't really have much of a pattern. And then what comes up, and I'll just thin them out and then get them planted as soon as they are germinated out within a couple of weeks. So I've already gotten this soil wet. And you'll notice that I'm just sowing these on top. So when I'm not using potting soil, usually garden soil, we have really good garden soil, but usually it's a little bit heavier medium, which is why oftentimes it's recommended to use potting soil. So I'm just putting these directly on the top, and then I'm just gonna use this little spray bottle, and I'm just gonna spray the top of the seeds here. This way, I can keep the top of these seeds really moist. They need to be moist the entire time until they sprout. We can't let them dry out. And then I can just put this top over like this. This is gonna hold my moisture in. And then I can put this in an area of the yard that still stays cool. Now, and as long as these are in seed format until they begin to grow, they don't need to have any light. So I can put this in a shady area. Once they begin to sprout and begin to get their first set of true leaves, which is the second set of leaves, then it's important that they need light. And so then I would move them into a more sunny area and then into their final spot in the garden. So the beautiful thing about that fall and winter crops is you don't have to do any food preservation, and you have all of these fresh vegetables just waiting for you to come out and harvest from them. Now, if you are like, but how many weeks out and which crops is it that I can actually do this with? I've got a full list for you over on the blog. So I'll have the link below in the video description. You can go there, and I've got an entire list. You also might be wondering, if you're like me, my goal is to raise a year's worth of vegetables and fruit for my family. We're a family of 4, so you may be wondering, well, how much should I plant of these different things to take us all the way through? And I have all of that information as well as the planting weeks in my book, The Family Garden Plan. But if you go to familygardenplan.com, you can actually get the entire chart that tells you how many plants to plant per person for a year's worth of food, totally for free.